The British victory opened new territory for exploration and expansion, but it also brought the responsibility for overseeing three troublesome groups. The first were thousands of resentful former French subjects. French settlements remained in Canada, and even today, the French are a prominent minority in Quebec and Montreal. To keep the settlements under control, the British maintained a close watch, employed harsh tactics to quell rebellion, and deported large numbers of former French colonists. One group, the Acadians, left New France and settled in Louisiana, particularly around New Orleans. Over time, the name Acadian was condensed to the now familiar Cajun. France's Native American allies were Britain's second problem. With Britain's victory in the French and Indian War, the Indian supporters of the French were now in a precarious position. The French were no longer able to back their Indian allies, which left tribes like the Huron out of an increasingly British-dominated power and trade network. While the French developed trade connections with local tribes, the British were more inclined to remove indigenous peoples altogether and clear the land for white settlement. Some tribes feared that the influx of British colonists would result in their eventual removal from their lands. With the colonists marching forward onto his people's land, Chief Pontiac of the Algonquian-speaking Ottawa tribe led a bloody rebellion that resulted in the death of thousands of soldiers and settlers. The Ottawa besieged all but three of the British forts west of the Appalachians. The British countered by giving smallpox-infected blankets and handkerchiefs to the Indians. This disease swept through the Indian tribes and decimated their forces. The British regained the upper hand, but nonetheless realized the need to cohabitate peacefully with the Indians to prevent further turmoil. The third troublesome group was, ironically, the British colonists, who were beginning to test the boundaries of Britain's rule and were becoming increasingly aggressive toward the natives. In an attempt to maintain the situation until a peaceful resolution could be reached, London's government issued the Proclamation of 1763, which called for a halt to westward expansion beyond the Appalachians. The Britons hoped the proclamation would keep the colonists tied more closely to English colonial authorities by confining them to the coast. The British were in dire financial straits after the 7 Years' War, and they hoped that keeping colonists east of the Appalachians would facilitate the collection of taxes and allow England to refill its coffers.
And we do hereby strictly forbid, on pain of our displeasure, all our loving subjects from making any purchases or settlements whatever, or taking possession of any of the lands above reserved, without our especial leave and license for that purpose first obtained. The Proclamation of 1763.
However, the proclamation incensed the colonists, who felt they had earned the right to expansion by risking their lives to settle new land. They openly defied British rule and rushed westward, creating new settlements, facing new challenges, and becoming more self-reliant. The Proclamation of 1763 surfaced some resentments harbored by the colonists as a result of the French and Indian War. The colonists felt that the British were overly and unnecessarily formal during the fighting. They resented having to quarter British troops in their homes during the war, and they were angered by Britain's attempts to tax the colonists to pay for Britain's wartime support. To the British, the end of the French and Indian War was a costly victory, but one that opened up the North American continent to their total control and development. To the colonists, the British government was perceived as a nuisance whose demands for taxes became symbolic of an increasingly irrelevant colonial authority.